Welcome, weary traveler of the night, to another quiet voyage through the corridors of history. History tells us that the Temple of Solomon was lost to time, burned, buried, and broken beneath Jerusalem's ancient dust. Only scripture and memory preserve its name, yet beneath this accepted tale lies a lingering disturbance, an echo that refuses to fade. Some say that under the visible ruins, chambers still lie hidden, vaults never truly erased. Their presence flickers through legend, carried by knights and secret brotherhoods across the centuries. If the temple was truly destroyed, why do its patterns, its architecture, its symbols, its rituals reappear again and again, as if its very design was preserved in secret, passed from one age to the next? When the Templars rose in the early 12th century, their headquarters stood directly on the Temple Mount, upon the ruins of Solomon's sanctuary. Official history calls it coincidence, a practical lodging arranged by royal favor. But coincidences of this magnitude rarely happen by chance. Almost overnight, these humble protectors of pilgrims transformed into something else, an order shrouded in wealth, secrecy, and purpose. They became keepers, not merely warriors. Whispers spread that beneath the temple foundations, they had unearthed something. Relics, perhaps, or ancient scrolls sealed away before the first conquest. Some said it was a map, others a code, a Solomonic formula that bound heaven and earth in divine proportion. If such a code existed, the Templars' meteoric rise was not a mystery, but an inevitability. Knowledge like that could alter kingdoms. It could create empires. The idea that their power came not from wealth, but from understanding. This is the suspicion history refuses to silence. Even when the Vatican condemned them, even when their order was shattered and their leaders burned, rumors persisted that something was discovered beneath those ancient stones, something that no crown, no cross, no decree could destroy. Over time, the image of Solomon's temple became more than architecture. It became a symbol, a cipher of sacred geometry, divine proportion, and hidden wisdom older than empires themselves. The Templars guarded that image. Later, the Freemasons inherited it. Two orders, separated by centuries, yet bound by the same reverence, the same covenant. Perhaps they were not separate at all, but stages of a single lineage, protectors of a pact that outlived kings and councils alike. The destruction of the temple, then, was only a surface story. Beneath it ran a current of continuity, preserved in silence, carried forward by those who could read the signs. Stand now upon the Temple Mount, where today only fragments remain. To the devout, it is holy ground. To the historian, contested territory. But to the initiate, it is a gateway, a place where the earth guards a vault that was never emptied. Within it, they say, lie the remnants of a wisdom too great for ordinary men. The Templars are said to have entered those hidden halls and emerged changed, carrying with them designs and doctrines that could shift the balance of nations. From that moment, they were no longer mere soldiers. They were custodians of a code. A code is not just text. It is a bridge between worlds, a system through which symbols unlock hidden connections. The Solomonic Code, if it ever existed, was not scripture or law. It was a pattern, a design of creation itself, mirroring the stars in stone, number, and proportion. Whoever understood it could align human will with cosmic order. Such power could not be written or preached. It had to be guarded. So the Templars concealed it, in rituals, in architecture, in silence. They became a vessel through which an ancient current flowed, hidden beneath the surface of faith and empire alike. Their sudden wealth, their authority, their defiance of kings. It all makes sense if their strength came from that secret inheritance. It also explains the fear they inspired in Rome. The church accused them of heresy, of worshipping strange idols, of performing forbidden rites. Perhaps those charges were exaggerations, but exaggerations often grow from something real. Something in their practices did not belong to Christianity alone. Something older pulsed beneath their oaths. And when the Vatican moved against them, it may not have been for greed or politics alone, but for fear. Fear that the Templars had discovered a truth that placed them beyond papal reach. Centuries later, that same architecture of symbols resurfaced among the Freemasons. The compass and square, the unfinished temple, the secret vault. Official history insists there is no link, but the echoes are too precise to dismiss. As if one order had passed the code to another in silence, ensuring that the current never ceased to flow. The Templars vanished from sight, but their spirit re-emerged, refined, restructured, veiled in new rituals. What history calls coincidence feels more like continuity. This continuity was the Vatican's deepest unease. For if both Templars and Freemasons guarded the same Solomonic inheritance, then their loyalty was not to church or crown, but to the code itself, a system older than doctrine, older than Christianity. The Vatican could crush men, but it could not crush an idea. The code survived, in carvings, in cathedrals, in whispered initiations. It became an invisible thread, winding through time, untouched by dogma, unbroken by persecution. Even now, its traces appear in the world around us, in sacred alignments, in forgotten blueprints, in patterns etched into stone and starlight. History forgets names, but symbols endure. Through them, the code still speaks. The temple may have fallen, but its essence was never buried. It lives in the architecture of power, in the geometry of cathedrals, in the very suspicion that history has been rewritten to conceal what persists. Perhaps the Templars did find something beneath the Temple Mount, something beyond relics, beyond wealth, something alive, a knowledge meant not for destruction, but preservation. If so, then the story of Solomon's temple was never about a building, but about a covenant, a continuity of mind and measure that binds heaven, earth, and man. The Templars carried it into Europe. The Freemasons enshrined it in their ritual. The Vatican feared it, but could not extinguish it. If the Solomonic Code is real, then history itself is only a veil, an outer shell concealing a deeper, older chronicle, one that still unfolds in silence beneath our feet, waiting for those who remember how to read the stones. The flames devoured men, but not memory. If the code was ever recovered, it survived the fire, flowing onward like a hidden current, waiting for another vessel. Centuries later, when the Freemasons emerged with rites echoing those of the Templars, the continuity could no longer be denied. Two orders, separated by time, yet united by the same obsession: the temple. Both were devoted to architecture and proportion, both shrouded in secrecy, both devoted to symbols that spoke a language older than dogma. Coincidence comforts the historian. Continuity haunts the initiate. For those who sense the undercurrent, the persistence of these parallels is proof enough. Proof that a hidden inheritance was never lost, only disguised. Knights once sworn to protect pilgrims evolved into custodians of geometry, keepers of sacred proportion, guardians of a wisdom that defied kings and popes alike. When their order was dissolved, their name became legend, yet their blueprint endured, quietly shaping the next brotherhood that claimed no ancestry yet carried all their echoes. To accept this is to acknowledge that history has been rewritten to conceal what could never be destroyed. Knowledge transmuted, passed into new vessels, reborn beneath the surface of faith and power. It is a paradox that a warrior order born for defense could end up shaping Europe's architecture, finance, and spiritual imagination. How could swordsmen become the protectors of sacred geometry unless they discovered something extraordinary? How could those accused of heresy become the template for later societies of secrecy and discipline unless their defeat had been illusion, their destruction incomplete? The truth may be that the Templars were not extinguished. They were transformed. Their knowledge flowed onward like fire hidden beneath ash, carried from generation to generation in silence. The Solomonic Pact, if it was indeed their inheritance, was not parchment or relic, but knowledge, encoded in stone, proportion, and the movement of stars. It lived in whispered vows, in the geometry of cathedrals, in the initiation chambers of men who remembered what others forgot. To guard such a code was not to protect a text, but a way of seeing, a worldview that aligned human intention with divine order. That is why both Templars and later Freemasons revered the temple not as ruins, but as a living symbol, a meeting point between heaven and earth. Their reverence was their rebellion, a declaration that true authority came not from papal crowns or royal decrees, but from a code far older than both. And so, the Templar mystery ceases to be inexplicable. Their sudden rise, their wealth, their autonomy, their defiance, all point to something deeper. They were not merely knights, they were the first keepers of the Solomonic Code. The Vatican could denounce them. Kings could burn them. But the current of knowledge continued, flowing unseen through Europe's secret bloodstream. From that moment on, the Templar story was no longer just theirs. It became the story of an unbroken covenant, waiting to resurface in new forms under new names. The Vatican once blessed the Templars, calling them holy warriors, guardians of pilgrims, servants of faith. But within 2 centuries, that blessing turned to fear. The change did not come from defeat in battle or loss of purpose, but from something more dangerous. The whisper that the order served loyalties beyond papal command. The Church could tolerate pride and power, but not rivalry, especially one rooted in sacred knowledge. If the Templars possessed fragments of the Solomonic Code, then their obedience was never to Rome, but to a memory sealed beneath the stones of Jerusalem. That fear is visible in the papal decrees that shadow their name. Officially, the charges spoke of heresy, idolatry, and blasphemous rituals. But these accusations were vague, inconsistent, smoke, hiding a fire too dangerous to name. Perhaps the Vatican feared that the Templars had touched a source of knowledge that undermined its monopoly on the divine. To admit, it would unravel Christendom itself. And so, scandal replaced truth. Trials and burnings silenced the accused, but the echoes remained. Why risk such upheaval? Why destroy an order that had once served so faithfully? Because usefulness had turned to rivalry. The Templars' vast wealth, their private hierarchy, their mysterious rites, all hinted at independence from papal control. They began to look less like servants and more like an alternative church, one guided not by faith alone, but by geometry, number, and code. The Vatican's fear was not of soldiers, but of scholars in armor, men who had seen what should have stayed buried. Even chroniclers of the time noted the strange defiance. The Templars answered to their Grand Master rather than the Pope. Their architecture reflected patterns older than Christian iconography. Their emblems, crosses entangled with circles and stars, suggested knowledge drawn from pre-Christian traditions. To the faithful, this was strange. To the Vatican, it was intolerable. A boundary had been crossed, from obedience into mystery, from religion into revelation. When Pope Clement V ordered their destruction, it was not mere politics. It was purification through fear. Kings wanted their gold, but Rome wanted their silence. The trials were brutal, the accusations absurd, the confessions extracted under torture. Yet through that violence, a deeper motive shines. Not greed, but dread. If the Templars were only rich warriors, seizure would have been enough. Instead, their identity had to be obliterated, their symbols erased, their very memory turned to poison. But knowledge cannot be burned. Ideas etched in stone and ratio cannot be drowned in confession. The Solomonic current slipped beneath the flames, finding new forms, new orders, new tongues. Thus, the rivalry between church and code did not end in the fire. It sank into history's undercurrent, re-emerging in lodges, in architecture, in symbols that still whisper of Jerusalem's vaults. The Vatican emerged, outwardly triumphant, yet inwardly uncertain whether it had truly slain the dragon it feared. Some whisper of archives deep within Rome, sealed chambers said to contain Templar scrolls too dangerous to reveal. What lies within them, only silence answers. But silence, too, is a confession. Centuries later, the pattern returned. The Freemasons, accused by the Church of secrecy, heresy, hidden allegiance, echoed every fear once spoken of the Templars. The same condemnations, the same unease, the same unspoken recognition. It is as if the Church saw in the Masonic halls the reflection of the same code it once sought to erase. The Vatican could burn men, but not geometry. It could destroy temples, but not proportion. It could erase names, but not memory. So the struggle continued, age after age, suppression followed by survival. Faith proclaimed authority from heaven, but the code whispered authority from within creation itself. The church demanded obedience, the code demanded understanding. One built cathedrals to glorify God, the other embedded God's mathematics within their walls. And therein lies the paradox. In trying to destroy the Solomonic Code, the Vatican enshrined it, carving its geometry into every cathedral across Christendom. The very architecture meant to prove the Church's supremacy became the vessel of the knowledge it feared. Faith and code fused, rivals bound forever in stone. The result is a haunting legacy. The Vatican could not confess what it feared, so it condemned it. It could not destroy what it condemned, so it absorbed it. Across Europe, in arches and vaults, the Solomonic pattern endures, silent yet visible, patient yet eternal. For those who see, the signs remain. The rivalry is unfinished, the memory unburied, the pact unbroken. And within this quiet tension lies a haunting suspicion that the true authority shaping history was never the Church, but the secret code it sought and failed to silence. Words fade, but symbols endure. They speak where language cannot, carrying memory through the ashes of centuries, even when witnesses are silenced and documents reduced to dust. The Templar cross, the Masonic square and compass, the interlaced geometry of cathedrals, all seem to belong to separate traditions. Yet their alignment with Solomonic imagery is too precise, too deliberate to dismiss as coincidence. In the ancient descriptions of Solomon's temple, two pillars stood at its entrance, Jachin and Boaz, symbols of stability and strength. Centuries later, these very pillars reappeared in the lodges of Freemasons, mirrored in stone and ritual. How could such echoes survive so vast a span of time unless a hidden current of knowledge flowed beneath them? A continuity unacknowledged by official history, but preserved by those initiated into silence. The cross borne by the Templars was no mere emblem of piety. It was geometry incarnate, a red intersection upon white, where balance, direction, and sacrifice met. Historians call it devotion. The initiated call it proportion. The Freemasons, inheriting instruments of design, compass and square, transformed these tools into sacraments of alignment. Heaven measured against earth, divine order mapped through architecture. The cross and the compass are not opposites. They are halves of the same dialogue. Sacrifice joined with structure, faith entwined with mathematics. In that dialogue whispers the memory of Solomon's temple, a sanctuary not merely built for worship, but for reflection of the cosmos itself. Even stranger is how the very architecture commissioned by the Vatican carries traces of this language. Cathedrals, ostensibly raised to glorify Christ, hide beneath their sacred facades the geometry of the temple. In the stained glass, one finds stars, compasses, spirals of proportion. In the vaults and arches, one senses a second language, a hidden script of stone legible only to those who know what to see. The builders, many of them masons by craft and code, embedded within holy walls the silent grammar of the Solomonic Pact. Thus, a cathedral served two masters. To the faithful, it was a house of prayer. To the initiated, a ciphered map of divine proportion. This duality reveals a profound paradox. If the Vatican condemned the Templars for secret rites, why do the same symbols endure within the very churches raised under its blessing? The answer may lie not in betrayal, but in inevitability. Knowledge, once uncovered, cannot be erased. It adapts, disguises itself, and hides in plain sight, woven into art, structure, and light. The Solomonic Code needed no scrolls. It lived in ratios, in the weight of stone, in the rhythm of architecture. It became a message that spoke without speech, visible yet unseen, eternal yet forbidden. Step into a Masonic lodge, and you step into an echo. The compass and square, the invocation of the great architect of the universe, the symbolic rebuilding of Solomon's temple. These are not inventions of modern philosophy, but continuations of a far older current. The oaths, the reverence for geometry, the sacred pillars, all mirror the Templar vows, refined and reinterpreted through centuries of silence. What the Templars guarded beneath the Temple Mount, the Freemasons encoded in ritual. Faith became design, obedience became alignment, religion became architecture. To the uninitiated, these are symbols of craft. To those who know, they are fragments of a cosmic diagram, the Solomonic vision of balance between heaven and earth. The temple, in this light, was never a monument of worship alone, but a model, a living cipher of how divine proportion could be reflected in the material world. To inherit that model was to hold power beyond papal decree, authority drawn not from hierarchy, but from harmony. This is why symbols matter, why they provoke unease, why they endure through flames and censorship. They are the residue of a pact that cannot be annulled by decree. The deeper one looks, the more undeniable the parallels become. Gothic cathedrals rise like frozen scripture, their pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and luminous symmetry repeating the same geometry once inscribed in Solomon's design. Masonic halls echo with oaths and alignments that mirror the vows of the Templars. Even modern nations bear crests and seals stamped with stars, compasses, and all-seeing eyes. Emblems whose ancestry lies not in medieval Europe, but in the sacred vaults of ancient Jerusalem. Was this diffusion accidental, or was it deliberate? The Solomonic Code woven into the very fabric of power to ensure survival even under suppression. Symbols die only when forgotten. When remembered, they outlast every empire. The Vatican, realizing this too late, faced an impossible paradox. To erase these signs was to erase its own monuments. Cathedrals, basilicas, and holy halls, each stood as both confession and concealment. Thus, the Church learned to tolerate what it could not destroy. Symbols visible yet unexplained, sanctioned yet mistrusted. For the common believer, they were decoration. For the initiated, revelation. And in that dual meaning, Christendom divided itself. One church of doctrine, another of geometry. One devoted to faith, another to proportion. Both coexisted, each pretending not to see the other. And centuries later, as we walk beneath arches and spires, gazing at compasses carved in stone or stars set above cathedral doors, we face the same choice. Do we see ornament or language, art or code? Every pillar, every rose window, every emblem whispers of an inheritance older than empire, a pact concealed, not lost. For these symbols persist when words fail. They should not align across time, and yet they do. They should not echo Solomon, and yet they do. The cross and the compass, the pillars and the stars, all converge upon one unspoken truth, that the Solomonic Code was never destroyed, only hidden, written into the world itself, awaiting those who remember how to read it. Stories tell of scrolls once sealed in copper, buried deep beneath the temple, prepared for an age when the world would again hunger for the forgotten design. The Church says they are gone, burned in conquest, yet fragments surface, in rumor, in art, in architecture, each a faint reminder that silence is not the same as absence. Perhaps the Templars did not merely find relics beneath the Temple Mount. Perhaps they found instructions, a covenant etched in proportion and light. And though kings and popes erased their names, the code they carried never died. It survives in the geometry of our faith, in the shadow of every cathedral, and in the suspicion that what endures beneath history's surface is not dogma, but design. In the caves of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls endured conquest, exile, and the slow decay of time. Their survival stands as a defiance of oblivion, a reminder that written memory can outlast the flames that consume empires. If such fragile parchment could sleep untouched in desert stone for centuries, then why not beneath the foundations of Solomon's temple? What if the Templars, dwelling above those ruins, discovered writings intentionally hidden by priests who foresaw the city's fall? Texts that spoke not of ritual or doctrine, but of alignment, of geometry, of a divine architecture linking heaven and earth. A code capable of shaping not merely sanctuaries, but civilizations. To imagine such a discovery is to illuminate the paradox of their ascent. A handful of poor knights, without title or treasury, rises to wield influence greater than kings. Coincidence falters beneath the weight of pattern. But an inheritance of secret texts, written in symbolic script, outlining a cosmic design, could transform warriors into keepers, soldiers into custodians of a wisdom beyond crown or creed. Such knowledge would threaten every seat of authority, for it shifted power from doctrine to geometry, from papal decree to divine proportion. The Church could not abide rivals appealing directly to heaven without its intercession. Thus began the campaign to erase. Legends of the lost scrolls whisper still. Fragments of Enochian lore, priestly instructions for temple rites, celestial charts binding the stars to the stones of Jerusalem. Whether myth or metaphor, they orbit one suspicion: that knowledge once sealed in the temple's vaults survived its fall, carried by the Templars into Europe, woven centuries later into the rites of Freemasonry. The repetition of temple imagery, of hidden chambers and lost words across both orders is not imitation. It is inheritance. The Masons did not invent their symbols. They remembered them. Their compass and square echo measurements once inscribed in Solomon's blueprints. Their initiations reenact recoveries, the uncovering of a vault, the lifting of a veil, the rediscovery of a forgotten name. Each rite becomes a dramatized act of remembrance, an echo of a memory that history tried to bury. If the Templars truly unearthed scrolls contradicting or expanding scripture, the Vatican's fear becomes clear. For centuries, the Church declared itself sole keeper of sacred memory. A rival archive, older and unmediated, would fracture that claim. To preserve its monopoly, the Vatican chose annihilation over admission, branding the Knights heretics, erasing their name, burning their records. Better silence than revelation. And yet silence is never perfect, for absence itself bears witness. Why do both Templar and Freemason traditions return again and again to the motif of the hidden archive, the lost word, the sealed chamber, the sacred geometry rediscovered? These are not literary inventions, but liturgies of memory. Through initiation and symbol, they keep the vanished texts alive in form, if not in parchment. Architecture becomes scripture, geometry becomes theology. Cathedrals encode what scrolls once taught, the measure of the holy drawn in ratio and light. Lodges reconstruct in miniature what the temple embodied, the sanctum as a reflection of cosmic order. The scrolls may have vanished from sight, but their essence persisted, in stone, in symbol, in oath. To deny their existence is to ignore the symmetry between what was destroyed in Jerusalem and what was reborn across Europe. As though the covenant itself refused erasure, finding new mediums through which to speak. The Solomonic Code, in this light, is not legend, but continuity, a transmission of proportion and principle through every form that endures the fire, text, stone, and vow. And yet, the question lingers: did the writings truly vanish? Or were they seized, hidden, and sealed away by those who understood their peril? Some claim the Vatican holds them still, entombed in the secret archives beneath Rome, confiscated during the Templar trials, and locked beside other forbidden works. Others believe fragments escaped, carried westward by surviving knights, entrusted to circles that would one day become the Freemasons, whose rituals hum faintly with the same cadence of Jerusalem's chambers. The truth is wrapped in silence, but silence itself testifies. Memory that refuses to die often conceals a root of reality. The vanished scrolls are more than legend. They embody the struggle over memory itself, the eternal contest between revelation and control, between the preservation of wisdom and the rewriting of truth. If the Solomonic Pact was truly encoded in those texts, then the story of history is not what it claims to be. What we read as loss is concealment. What we call erasure is survival. The surface narrative tells of destruction, of temples burned, archives lost, ashes scattered. But beneath that tale runs another quieter thread, a survival in secrecy, a code carried forward through silence. To glimpse that undercurrent is to understand the triad of forces that shaped the Western world. The Templars, those who discovered. The Vatican, those who feared. The Freemasons, those who remembered. Each played its part in the passage of a single inheritance, the Solomonic Code, unbroken beneath the dust of time. For even now, beneath the banners of faith and reason, its geometry whispers from the arches of cathedrals, the proportions of lodges, the alignments of stars. The scrolls may sleep, but the design endures, alive in every angle of light that touches stone, in every ritual that recalls a lost temple, and in every heart that senses the truth, that what was hidden was never lost, only waiting to be read again. Why Solomon? Why does a medieval order of warrior monks, and centuries later a fraternity of builders and philosophers, elevate a temple long vanished above all other symbols? The Church venerates Calvary and the tomb, the crucifixion and resurrection, the story of redemption. But for the Templars and the Freemasons, the sacred lies not in death and salvation, but in construction and alignment, in the act of building itself. The Temple of Solomon represents more than a lost monument. It is geometry made divine, the map of cosmic order rendered in stone. To rebuild it in ritual, even symbolically, is to reaffirm a covenant between heaven and earth. The essence of the Solomonic Code. This code is not scripture to be read aloud. It is a pattern to be enacted. It lives in proportion, in symmetry, in the discipline of initiation. The oaths of Freemasonry, like those whispered by Templar knights, bind their initiates not only to brotherhood, but to silence, the preservation of an invisible inheritance. Their vows are sealed by penalties so grave, so ancient in tone, that they echo not mere fraternity, but priesthood. No one guards a social club with the threat of symbolic death. Such vows belong to those entrusted with something irreplaceable. If the Templars once protected scrolls or relics, then the Freemasons became protectors of that memory, translating it into ritual form so it could never die, even if every text was lost. Each initiation, therefore, is both remembrance and transmission, a living archive of the pact. The imagery remains astonishingly consistent across time. The pillars of Jachin and Boaz that stand in every Masonic lodge mirror those described in ancient accounts of Solomon's sanctuary, and later in depictions of Templar chambers beneath Jerusalem. The motif of light emerging from darkness, the revelation of hidden words to the worthy, the recovery of a lost name, all mirror the whispered rites that so unnerved the Inquisition. The Masonic lost word is not a metaphor of forgetting, but a memory of loss. The absence of the vanished scrolls once guarded beneath the Temple Mount. Each element alone could be dismissed as invention. Together, they suggest inheritance. The Vatican understood this continuity. Its condemnations of Freemasonry repeat, almost word for word, the accusations once leveled against the Templars, secret oaths, rival loyalties, hidden heresies. What the Church truly feared was not secrecy itself, but the persistence of an older allegiance, one that bypassed papal mediation, tracing its roots to a sanctuary older than Christendom. To acknowledge such continuity would mean admitting that the Solomonic Pact, far from destroyed, had only changed form, surviving fire and persecution to flow into the lodges and cathedrals of Europe. This is the paradox of survival. The Templars perished, yet their essence endured. Their spirit clothed itself in new garments, the rituals of the Freemasons, who, knowingly or not, continued the same covenant. What passed forward was not the name or structure of the order, but its heart, reverence for sacred geometry, devotion to hidden wisdom, and loyalty to an unbroken thread of divine proportion. That is why the rituals of Freemasonry feel ancient, even in modern halls. They are not inventions of an age, but vessels of continuity, living performances of remembrance. Scrolls can be burned, relics seized, archives sealed, but memory enacted in ritual cannot be destroyed. The Solomonic Code survives precisely because it was woven into behavior, into the words spoken during initiation, into the architecture of the lodge, into gestures repeated across generations. To swear an oath is to renew the covenant. To pass between the pillars is to walk again through Solomon's porch. To receive light from darkness is to relive discovery. In this way, the Freemasons became not merely heirs, but embodiments. The code itself made flesh through ceremony and design. Thus, the Solomonic Pact never ceased to move. It flows through the chambers of lodges, the geometry of cathedrals, the measured stones of monuments. Every initiation, every alignment ensures its survival into another generation, another century, another empire. The Templars may have vanished from history's pages, but their inheritance has not. It continues, hidden in the rites of those who still guard. Knowingly or unknowingly, the Covenant Rome could never erase. Across continents and ages, the Solomonic Code reveals itself not in doctrine, but in design, etched into stone, inscribed in proportion, traced in light. Geometry became scripture, alignment became faith. Gothic cathedrals rose like frozen hymns to divine mathematics. Their towering spires lifted the gaze toward heaven, while their blueprints mirrored the sacred ratios once measured in Solomon's sanctuary. To the uninitiated, these were simply houses of God. To those who understood, they were diagrams, maps of the universe rendered in light and stone. How could Masons, separated by centuries and kingdoms, replicate the same harmonic proportions unless guided by a code transmitted in secrecy? Chartres Cathedral, with its labyrinth of stone, echoes the axial alignments described in the Lost Temple's measurements. Its rose windows radiate in geometric precision that reflects not mere artistry, but cosmology, the geometry of heaven itself. From Notre Dame in Paris to Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, the same ratios reappear, whispered through stone, unbroken by time. Rosslyn, in particular, carved long before the official birth of Freemasonry, overflows with symbols of compass, square, and star. Its walls are audacious, not in invention, but in revelation, as though its builders carried fragments of an ancient code and embedded them in a Christian facade the church could not decipher. The Freemasons inherited and perfected this legacy. Their lodges, though modest in scale, replicate the same sacred proportions, always with the twin pillars, always aligned to the cardinal points, always mirroring the inner vault of Solomon's temple. The initiate walks through these spaces as through the blueprint of the cosmos, each step calibrated, each word measured. Here, architecture is not decoration, but participation. The building itself, a silent witness, transmitting memory without parchment or priest. That is the genius of the Solomonic Code. It needs no speech to survive. Stone remembers what words cannot. Geometry outlives creed. Across oceans, its pattern re-emerges. In Rosslyn, in Rome, and even in Washington, D.C., where obelisks and domes mirror the same alignments traced by compass and square. The Capitol's dome reflects the celestial vaults of old. The Washington Monument rises as a single pillar, twin in concept to Jachin and Boaz. Coincidence, perhaps, or continuity unacknowledged. For sacred geometry is more than mathematics. It is a memory made visible, a covenant written not in ink, but in proportion. And through it, the Solomonic Code endures. A silent, indestructible scripture whispering through architecture, ritual, and time itself. It is a memory made flesh in measurement, a way of perceiving existence as a structure of correspondence, where every proportion mirrors a divine truth. The Solomonic Pact, if it endures, has always been about alignment, not belief, but balance, not dogma, but design. To rebuild the temple, whether in marble or in ritual form, is to participate in its covenant once more, to bring order to chaos, and to remind creation of its own symmetry. Thus, cathedrals, lodges, and entire cities become chapters of a hidden manuscript, one that cannot be read, only lived within. Each column placed in harmony, each arch raised according to sacred ratio, is an act of remembrance. To build, in this sense, is to pray. The Vatican, perhaps without realizing it, became both adversary and vessel of the very thing it feared. Many of its grandest basilicas, from St. Peter's in Rome to Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, are mapped upon the same mathematical ratios that once governed Solomon's temple. For the builders, the masons and architects were heirs of that same craft, versed in geometry and its ancient symbols. Even as papal decrees condemn the Solomonic Code, its logic seeped into the very stones of Christendom. This is the great paradox of history. What power seeks to destroy, it often preserves. The church that sought to silence the code enshrined it instead. In every dome that mimics the heavens, in every nave aligned to the solstice. Fear became transmission. Suppression became survival. The geometry the Vatican condemned is written now into the walls of its own monuments. Look at Europe from above, and one sees not random placement, but order. Sanctuaries built upon ancient pagan sites, churches aligned with celestial events, lodges rising beside royal courts. Together, they form not isolated monuments, but a vast design, a constellation drawn across the continent, invisible to those who see only stone, but evident to those who read in lines and angles. To walk these cities is to traverse a diagram of devotion, a silent architecture of covenant. Most who tread these streets are unaware that beneath their feet runs a geometry older than the faiths that surround them. Symbols can be erased from books, but geometry resists deletion. A church can be censored, but not the curve of its arch. A heresy can be forgotten, but not the golden ratio that shapes its sanctuary. The Solomonic Code survives not as a myth, but as measurement, preserved in basilicas, chapels, and the very gridwork of civilization. Long after kings and popes have turned to dust, the stones still whisper alignment. It is through this geometry that the covenant continues to speak. Through the cathedrals of Europe, the lodges of craftsmen, the monuments of empires. It murmurs across centuries that the pact was never broken, only concealed, waiting for those awake enough to recognize its pattern in the geometry of the world. From Jerusalem to Paris, from Rome to Washington, the same message recurs. The Solomonic Code endures, alive in proportion, alive in stone. Yet geometry may not be its only vessel. Dynasties, too, appear to trace the same invisible thread. Behind marriages and coronations, from the Plantagenets of England to the Habsburgs of Austria, runs a pattern of alliance less political than symbolic. History records strategy. Rumor senses continuity. The idea that Solomon's inheritance might have survived not only in architecture, but in blood unsettles the orthodox narrative. For it suggests a continuity immune to conquest. Wisdom preserved not on parchment, but in lineage. If this were true, every royal marriage became more than diplomacy. It became renewal of a sacred bond. Medieval chronicles, in their reverence for noble unions, often hide in plain sight references to temple symbolism. Houses long tied to Templar patrons later appear entwined with Masonic circles, as though the line of descent was not merely genealogical, but initiatory. Were these unions accidents of power, or deliberate attempts to preserve fragments of the pact? Legends across continents echo this theme. The Ethiopian Solomonic dynasty, tracing descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, claims to have safeguarded the Ark of the Covenant in Axum. In Europe, the Stuarts, guardians of Templar law in Scotland, were said to descend from the same sacred line. To Orthodox historians, such claims are myth, yet myths persist when they protect truths too dangerous to keep in plain sight. If the covenant could be transmitted through blood as well as stone, then rulers became more than governors. They became living vessels of the pact. Their authority was not merely divine right, but inherited obligation to preserve, to conceal, to protect memory. The Freemasons' later veneration of nobles and kings within their lodges, granting them high rank regardless of skill, may have been less flattery than recognition, an acknowledgement of an older lineage woven into flesh. From this angle, revolutions acquire a new dimension. The fall of monarchies may not only represent social upheaval, but an assault on the hidden continuity of bloodlines tied to Solomon's inheritance. For the Vatican, this possibility was intolerable. Apostolic succession offered legitimacy through Peter. Solomonic descent threatened to supersede it through blood. It was one thing to rule the church by decree, another to face families who claimed to carry within them a covenant older than Rome. Thus the church feared not just documents, but dynasties, not only scrolls, but the silent persistence of sacred blood. The destruction of the Templars was one remedy. The quiet dismantling of royal houses suspected of hidden loyalties, another. Yet just as geometry resists erasure, so too does lineage. Blood remembers as stone remembers. And so, in architecture and ancestry alike, the Solomonic Code endures, hidden in the very fabric of civilization. It waits not in libraries, but in cathedrals and family crests, in the alignments of cities and the marriages of kings, the unbroken pattern of a covenant that, despite every attempt to silence it, continues to pulse beneath history's skin. Families may fall, thrones may crumble, crowns may be scattered to the wind, yet blood remembers. Exile does not end a lineage, it merely sends its roots deeper into shadow. Marriages, like bridges between dynasties, wove continuity where conquest tore borders apart. The Habsburg jaw, the Stuart claims, the Bourbon enigmas, each carries whispers that beneath royal ambition flows a more ancient inheritance, a covenant written not on parchment, but in flesh. A pact sealed in blood is harder to seize, for it leaves no vault to raid, no text to burn. It moves silently through generations, hidden behind the masks of power and ceremony. To walk through European history with this suspicion is to glimpse a pattern beneath politics. Intersections between noble houses and forbidden orders. Crests that bear symbols echoing Solomon's temple. Marriages that renew forgotten alliances. Why did the same families condemned by papal suspicion so often reappear as patrons of Freemasonry, protectors of Masons, defenders of architects? Perhaps for them, initiation was not novelty, but remembrance. Ritual was not imitation, but renewal. The palace and the lodge, bound in unspoken alliance, one preserving the code in stone and oath, the other in lineage and inheritance, ensured that the Solomonic Pact would never be fully extinguished. This perhaps explains why Europe's royal history feels haunted by lost heirs, hidden marriages, sealed archives. Beneath the romantic legends of blood and betrayal lingers something colder: continuity. The suspicion that what was once guarded in Solomon's vaults is now carried in veins and names. To dismiss it as legend is to ignore the persistence of the pattern, its quiet reappearance in coats of arms, in Masonic symbolism, in the very architecture commissioned by those same dynasties. Geometry and blood, two halves of the same covenant, one built in stone, the other transmitted in flesh. When the Templars faced extinction in the early 14th century, history records their trial, their confessions, their execution. Yet in the margins lies another story, one of negotiation, not annihilation. In Paris, as their leaders awaited judgment, whispers spread of documents drafted behind closed doors, never meant for ordinary eyes. The public saw charges of heresy and idolatry. The hidden hand saw something else, an arrangement. This erased pact, if it existed, was not between knight and pope, but between remnants of the order and forces intent on preserving what had been uncovered beneath Solomon's temple. While the flames of suppression consumed men, their discoveries may have been transferred, safeguarded, and concealed. When centuries later, the Chinon parchment was unearthed in the Vatican's archives, revealing that Pope Clement V had quietly absolved key Templar leaders, the contradiction shattered the official narrative. Why absolve those condemned? Why hide the pardon for centuries? Because absolution implies acknowledgement that what the Templars held was too valuable to destroy, too perilous to release. The Church's silence becomes its own confession. For in erasing the order, it may have sealed an agreement: condemnation for the world, preservation for the initiated, public destruction, private continuity. Such paradoxes are the architecture of power. The Vatican sought to dominate all spiritual authority, yet dared not obliterate what it could not control. Kings demanded gold, yet what they seized was surface treasure, land, estates, relics. What they missed was the true inheritance, the knowledge that moved beneath the surface, protected by silence. Legends speak of Templar ships sailing from French ports before the arrests, fleets that vanished into the fog of the Atlantic. Chroniclers imagined gold. But gold does not vanish into myth. Knowledge does. What if those ships carried not treasure, but manuscripts, relics, scrolls, instructions, the fruits of excavation beneath the Temple Mount? The true treasure of Solomon would not have been wealth, but wisdom, the code itself. And centuries later, when Freemasonry emerged, veiling Templar emblems in a new language of geometry and fraternity, could this have been the fulfillment of that erased pact? A silent transfer from condemned order to surviving vessel, ensuring that the covenant would persist under a new name. The continuity between the two is too elegant to dismiss as coincidence. The secrecy, the oaths, the twin pillars, the emphasis on light recovered from darkness, all echo the rituals once whispered in the Templar chapels. If this is true, then Paris was not only the site of the Templars' destruction, but of their preservation. Beneath the spectacle of fire and accusation unfolded an invisible negotiation, a quiet handover of what could not be publicly acknowledged. The Vatican gained victory in appearance. The code gained immortality in silence. The archives themselves tell on their keepers. Thousands of Templar documents remain sealed, fragments scattered, many never released. What purpose does secrecy serve centuries after the heresy is cooled? To protect faith or to protect truth? If the records contained only superstition and sin, they would have been paraded as triumph. Instead, they are hidden. The silence surrounding them is not absence, but evidence, proof of an understanding too destabilizing to name. For the Church feared not merely knowledge, but rivalry, an authority rooted not in Rome's apostolic line, but in the sacred geometry of Solomon's sanctuary. To reveal that the Templars had uncovered fragments of a divine order older than the Church itself would unravel the monopoly of faith. And so, the cycle of condemnation began again. Freemasonry rose, and with it came the same accusations, the same papal bulls, the same fear. Each repetition was not new persecution, but the echo of an older anxiety. The ghost of the erased pact still walking through time. Paris, then, is not a grave, but a veil. Beneath the smoke of martyrdom, an agreement was made, one that allowed the flame to pass unseen into new hands. The names changed. The covenant endured. This is the paradox at the heart of history. Power burns what it cannot own, yet in burning spreads the spark. The Templars died, yet their covenant lived. The Church triumphed publicly, yet its secret preserved the very thing it condemned. And so, the Solomonic Code survives, not in documents, not in vaults, but in silence, in symbol, in stone, in blood. What is erased from record persists in ritual. What is denied in word endures in geometry. What is condemned in daylight thrives in shadow. The erased Pact of Paris was never written for the eyes of history. Yet, its shadow remains visible to those who look where silence gathers. In the unspoken alignments of architecture, in the persistence of symbols, in the endurance of memory. For history ends in chronicles, but truth endures in whispers. And the whisper of the Solomonic Code still moves beneath the foundations of the world. When Freemasons gather in their lodges, the symbols surrounding them are not ornaments, but instructions. The compass and the square, simple instruments of measure, become reminders of cosmic truth. Balance, proportion, harmony. These are not merely moral virtues, but echoes of an older geometry, the same sacred mathematics once whispered within the courts of Solomon. It is no accident that their prayers invoke the great architect of the universe, for in their view, the divine is not abstraction, but design, an intelligence expressed through proportion, through the measure by which the heavens themselves were laid out. Their lodges, like ancient sanctuaries, are not built at random. They are aligned with deliberation, oriented towards the stars, the solstices, the cardinal points. This is no aesthetic choice. It is remembrance. The temple described in Scripture was never merely a house of prayer, but a cosmic diagram, its architecture an imitation of heaven's pattern. To rebuild it symbolically is to renew that alignment, to take part in the covenant that binds the earthly to the celestial. Freemasonry, inheriting the spiritual architecture once guarded by the Templars, transformed the Solomonic Code into living ritual. Every initiation becomes a reconstruction of the lost temple, every symbol a fragment of its design. In these acts, the code is not merely remembered, it is enacted. Across Europe, traces of this ancient alignment endure in stone. Gothic cathedrals, the work of Masons long before the formal fraternity existed, are calendars built of light and shadow, their foundations laid to mirror the heavens. When dawn on the solstice illuminates an altar or a window, it is not coincidence, it is ceremony. Light itself becomes scripture, geometry becomes prayer. The Vatican blessed these structures, unaware or unwilling to admit that their alignments predated papal authority. The architecture of Christendom was quietly inscribed with the Code of Solomon. The paradox is profound. The very church that condemned the Solomonic inheritance in Masonic halls enshrined it in its own cathedrals. The same geometry it forbade in secrecy was glorified in public stone. What it feared, it preserved. The legacy continued. Masonic lodges, though modest compared to cathedrals, are precise in form. Each a microcosm of the temple, its walls aligned to the cardinal directions, its twin pillars named Jachin and Boaz, its ceiling painted with stars. Every element is deliberate. The initiate who walks the ritual path does not simply move through space. He walks through the cosmos itself. Each step retraces the sacred geometry of the Temple Mount. Each gesture a silent remembrance of the covenant between earth and sky. The Washington Monument stands as modern proof that this current never ceased. Its obelisk, aligned with the Capitol and the cardinal axes, reflects ancient Egyptian and Solomonic symbolism alike. The city that claims enlightenment as its parent was also built upon sacred geometry. Its plan, drawn by men of the craft, mirrors not only reason, but ritual. A continuation of the same alignment carried from Jerusalem to Paris, from Rosslyn to Washington. The heavens are imprinted in its streets. The stars have become its architects. Coincidence fades before such repetition. The Vatican's response to this geometry was predictable. Condemnation, accusation, fear of rival devotion. Yet how can one condemn the language that built one's own sanctuaries? This is the unending paradox of the Solomonic Code. It survives both in obedience and in defiance, within the cathedrals of popes and the lodges of those they denounce. The covenant cannot be destroyed because it transcends institution. Wherever builders remember the stars, the pact continues. To the initiate, the lesson is clear. The heavens above and the stones below are reflections of each other. To align a hall with the sky is to recognize the divine order itself. The universe is a temple, and every true temple a model of the universe. Solomon's wisdom was this realization that creation is geometry in motion, that divinity reveals itself in the alignment of light, number, and stone. The Solomonic Code, passed from Templar vaults to Masonic rites, persists not as theology, but as practice, a living memory of proportion. It survives because it is performed. Each cathedral aligned to sunrise, each lodge oriented to the pole star, each monument placed by compass is an act of remembrance. To the unseeing eye, these are works of architecture. To those initiated, they are inscriptions of continuity. Initiation, for both Templars and Freemasons, was never mere ceremony. It was a reenactment, a dramatized awakening. The candidate, blindfolded, led through darkness, symbolically dies to ignorance before being reborn to recognition. His unveiling is illumination, the recovery of lost sight, the rediscovery of alignment. Between the pillars, he walks the path that joins heaven and earth. Every oath, every symbol, every silence is an echo of that ancient code. The Templar trials record confused accusations of secret oaths, of kisses, of denials of faith. But beneath the Inquisitors' misinterpretations lay something the Church could not name: ritual death and rebirth, the symbolic burial of ignorance and the resurrection of understanding. Centuries later, the Masons preserved the same pattern: the slain master, the lost word, the rediscovery of light. Both enact the same mystery. That truth can be buried, but never destroyed. that what falls into darkness will rise. Again, this is the essence of the Solomonic Pact. It could not be silenced because it was never contained in a book. It lived in gestures, in architecture, in stars, in the memories of those who vowed to remember. Every initiate became a living archive, carrying fragments of a covenant too dangerous to write. The Vatican could seize scrolls, but not memories, burn men, but not meaning. What survives of the Solomonic Code today is not merely history, but presence. It endures in the orientation of cities, in the symmetry of monuments, in the silent compass by which the world is still unconsciously built. The heavens remain its parchment, light its language, proportion its voice. And as long as builders measure by stars, the covenant between heaven and earth, between creator and creation, remains unbroken. To walk this path is to mirror the temple itself, destroyed yet never vanished, hidden yet never erased. In initiation, the seeker ceases to be merely an observer of mystery and becomes its vessel. The body itself becomes the sanctuary, the live-in vault where the Solomonic Code is written not in ink, but in awareness. Every vow is a seal upon memory. Every ritual gesture is an inscription. The temple was never meant to be found in stone alone. It was always meant to be rebuilt within the initiate, a geometry of flesh, thought, and remembrance. Thus, the Solomonic Pact transcends architecture and scripture alike. It is personal, a living inheritance that moves through the consciousness of those who have awakened to it. This is why it cannot die. Scrolls can burn, orders can fall, but memory, once embodied, cannot be erased. The covenant endures in human vessels, in the silence of those who have seen the pattern, in the breath of those who have sworn to keep it. Even now, initiation remains the heart of Masonic practice, a drama both ancient and alive. To the uninitiated, it is ceremony. To the initiate, it is alignment. Each step retraces the cosmic architecture of Solomon's temple. Each word revives the covenant between heaven and man. Whether he understands or not, every candidate becomes a link in the unbroken chain, a renewal of the pact that has flowed through temples, through Templars, through centuries. And so the code survives, not because it is preserved, but because it is lived. Every generation of initiates becomes the library of a truth too dangerous for parchment. The oaths ensure secrecy, the symbols ensure continuity, the memory ensures resurrection. This is why condemnation never sufficed, why inquisitions failed. The Solomonic Code lives within the very minds the Church sought to silence. Yet history reveals another paradox, that the Vatican and the Lodge, for all their apparent hostility, often moved in strange synchronization, two rivals orbiting the same hidden sun. For every papal bull denouncing Freemasonry, there were whispers of cardinals who sympathized, of popes who looked away, of architects commissioned by Rome who were quietly of the craft. The Renaissance made this tension visible. Geometry, once condemned as pagan art, reappeared in the heart of the Church. Under papal patronage, Michelangelo and Bernini raised monuments whose forms obeyed not theological formulae, but cosmic proportion. St. Peter's Basilica itself, the Vatican's crown, rises on measurements that trace to the geometry of Solomon's temple. Was this hypocrisy, or was it admission? Perhaps Rome recognized what it dared not confess, that the Solomonic principles of measure and harmony were too divine to deny. The condemnation of the symbol became a mask for its absorption. What the Church forbade in speech, it enshrined in marble. Rivalry on the pulpit became collaboration in the stones. This strange dialogue continued across centuries, papal envoys rumored to attend lodge meetings in disguise, Masonic financiers quietly bankrolling cathedrals, architects designing churches aligned to the solstice, just as lodges aligned to the stars. History records opposition. The monuments record communion. The two currents, Apostolic and Solomonic, could not destroy one another, for both drew from the same spring. The Enlightenment only deepened the entanglement. As revolutions spread through Europe, Masonic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity reshaped the world. The Vatican, fearing chaos, condemned them, yet those same principles echoed Christ's own teachings. The Church fought the lodges publicly, yet the architecture of its cities, the mathematics of its basilicas, and even the quiet affiliations of its own clergy betrayed a reluctant kinship. Condemnation became theater. Silence became collaboration. The more Rome denounced the lodges, the more it borrowed their geometry. The more the Masons rejected the Church, the more their rituals echoed the rhythm of its sacraments. Both guarded mysteries of initiation, both invoked divine architecture, both sought to bind heaven and earth in structure and symbol. In truth, their enmity was a mirror. The Vatican held authority through revelation, the Masons through proportion, one through word, the other through measure. Both served the same unseen covenant. And so, history's greatest paradox reveals itself. The two powers sworn to erase one another became twin custodians of the same secret. The Vatican preserved the code in its cathedrals. The Masons preserved it in their rituals. Each called the other heretic, yet both knelt, knowingly or not, before the same geometry. The Solomonic Pact endures not because one side triumphed, but because both, in rivalry and silence alike, ensured its survival. Condemnation built its walls, initiation kept its flame. Together, cross and compass, mitre and square, they carried forward the covenant, written not in stone or scripture, but in the enduring language of proportion, memory, and light. Stone remembers what words forget. In every cathedral arch, in every carved ratio of 3, 7, and 12, the same language reappears. A geometry that breathes scripture and science at once. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, veiled in Christian iconography, conceals musical scales, constellations, and the blueprint of Solomon's temple, its symmetry not a flourish, but a cipher. To outsiders, these details seem ornamental. To initiates, they are fragments of the Solomonic Code, an alphabet of proportion. The same numbers repeat across centuries because they are not decoration, but invocation, a quiet renewal of covenant through measure. The body, too, is temple and manuscript. The grips and gestures of Freemasonry, hands meeting in silence, precise and deliberate, are sentences in a language unspoken. Each touch, each angle, each step through the lodge is inscription. To move thus is to write the code into flesh. What inquisitors once called blasphemy was memory preserved in motion. In architecture, the cube, the circle, and the triangle repeat endlessly. Visible in chapels, basilicas, and monuments from Rome to Washington. Their ratios bind the biblical and the mathematical, forming a silent thread between faith and geometry. The pillars, Jachin and Boaz, always two, always guarding a threshold, stand not only in lodges, but in the hidden design of countless churches. To pass between them, whether of stone or symbol, is to cross from visible worship into hidden alignment. Rome's own cathedrals bear the same signatures. To destroy the code would be to unbuild Christianity's greatest monuments. The Church condemned the cipher, yet prayed within its proportions. The contradiction is perfect. for it ensures survival. The code endured precisely because it was built into what could never be outlawed. Architecture, rhythm, the human hand. And when empires fell, the code resurfaced in new banners. The revolutions of France and America spoke the language of freedom, yet their symbols, radiant suns, unfinished pyramids, all-seeing eyes, were Solomonic in origin. Geometry migrated from cathedrals to constitutions. The covenant, denied the altar, took the form of government seals and city plans. The Great Seal of the United States bears the unfinished pyramid and the divine eye, not Christian, but Masonic. On every dollar, the Solomonic signature circulates daily, unseen, yet omnipresent. Revolutionaries spoke of reason and liberty, but their emblems whispered continuity, not rebellion. Thus, the Solomonic Code endures. Hidden not in vaults, but in skylines. Alive not in manuscripts, but in monuments. Remembered by those who build. Forgotten by those who walk among their works. The covenant survives because it does not hide in shadows. It hides in sight. Crowns crumble, but symbols remember. When monarchies fell and revolutions rose, the language of the Solomonic Code merely changed its accent. What was once carved into cathedrals now gleamed upon coins and flags. The cross gave way. To the compass, the scepter to the square, yet the geometry remained untouched. In Paris and Philadelphia, in London and Washington, the same invisible hand traced its proportions into new emblems, new constitutions, new nations. The Vatican, long accustomed to ruling through divine decree, found itself haunted by its own reflection. Where once it had feared knights and lodges, it now faced republics whose very foundations whispered the same geometry. Condemnation thundered from pulpits, yet it came too late. The covenant had already escaped the sanctuary, woven itself into the architecture of the modern world. To erase it would have meant erasing civilization itself. How could the same code sanctify both altar and revolution, crown and guillotine? Perhaps because its loyalty was never to institution, but to alignment, the balance between heaven and earth, memory and power. The Solomonic Pact survives by adapting, inhabiting whatever vessel ensures its continuity. When kings fall, it crowns republics. When temples burn, it builds cities. When books perish, it hides in symbols. The form shifts, the pattern endures. In revolutionary France, geometry itself was enthroned. The cult of reason replaced saints with symbols of proportion. Cathedrals became temples of light and number. What priests saw as blasphemy was, in truth, translation. A covenant moving from scripture to science, from liturgy to architecture. The processions of the revolution mimicked Masonic initiations. Altars to liberty repeated the structure of Solomon's sanctuary. Even in the language of liberty, the Solomonic cadence persisted. Across the Atlantic, the pattern reappeared. The Great Seal of the United States, the unfinished pyramid crowned by the all-seeing eye, carries no trace of Christ, yet radiates with the geometry of the temple. The founding fathers, many of them initiates, encoded the covenant into the republic itself. Every dollar that passes from hand to hand carries fragments of that silent scripture, as if commerce itself became ritual, the daily circulation of the code. Wars, too, bear its imprint. From the Crusades to the Napoleonic campaigns, from the American Revolution to the Congress of Vienna, one finds the same hidden alignments. Treaties signed beneath Masonic emblems, generals sworn to unseen oaths, monuments raised to invisible proportions. The Solomonic hand moves quietly, guiding without proclamation. It is never on the throne, yet thrones fall when it shifts. By the Enlightenment, its network spanned bloodlines and ideologies alike. Ministers, scientists, and philosophers met beneath the same symbols once etched into Templar vaults. Napoleon, though crowned by a pope, filled his empire with Solomonic emblems, stars, eagles, and numbers echoing the sacred ratios of Jerusalem's lost temple. His defeat changed borders, but not the current beneath them. The code endured, waiting in silence for its next vessel. The Vatican raged and issued bulls, yet its fury betrayed impotence. How do you excommunicate a geometry? How do you burn a symbol that is carved into the very church walls? The condemnation of Masonry revealed fear, the recognition that the covenant was no longer a rival order, but the hidden architecture of the world itself. The Solomonic Pact had become too deeply woven into the fabric of civilization to be undone. Even modern wars bear its shadow. Memorials aligned with solstices, capitals built on geometric grids, towers raised in proportions that echo the temple's forgotten measures, all testify that the current still flows. Nations believe they build for glory, yet their monuments repeat an ancient memory. The code guides through instinct when knowledge fades. What was once conscious becomes inherited rhythm. And always, the story circles back to the sealed vault, the last chamber beneath the Temple Mount. Legends call it the resting place of the Ark, of scrolls too dangerous for the world to read, or of geometry itself, a design so perfect it could remake creation. The Templars were said to have found it. The Masons rebuilt it in symbol. The Vatican sealed it in silence. Perhaps the vault is not a room, but a pattern, replicated endlessly in cathedrals, monuments, and mines. Every age dreams of opening it, yet perhaps it has never been closed. Each sunrise through a rose window, each lodge aligned to the stars, each oath spoken in darkness is another opening of that hidden door. The vault is not underground. It is within us, carried by those who remember and those who build. To uncover it fully would be to expose the quiet hand that has shaped history, to reveal that faith, science, monarchy, and revolution are but instruments of one geometry. Such revelation would undo the illusion of separation, and perhaps that is why it remains sealed. The silence of the vault is protection, not concealment. And so, the circle closes. The Templars carried the covenant from Jerusalem. The Freemasons preserved it. The Vatican feared it yet immortalized it in stone. The nations of the world inscribed it upon their seals and cities. The Solomonic Code has never vanished. It waits, in monuments, in rituals, in ratios, in us. The candle burns low. The corridors of history fade to shadow. Yet somewhere, beyond doctrine and empire, the hidden vault remains, not a chamber, but a presence. The last door is never closed, and the last word is never spoken. The covenant breathes still, unseen, unbroken, shaping the world in silence.